much, Jeff, for that great introduction, and thank you, Maggie, and thank you to Moses Grant Foundation and the Community Foundation of Scranton. And thank you all for joining us on this really important topic. And what I'm going to do is actually stop my video because I find it very distracting to present to myself like I'm talking in the mirror. So I'm going to do that. Hopefully that went off. And so today's agenda, we're going to do we did the introductions, we're going to do a little bit of an icebreaker. I'm going to do a presentation on 3 different topics. I'm going to talk about resilient workplace culture, give you some practical tips about facilitating virtual meetings, and then some tips on managing remote teams. And I know we're all kind of still getting used to this, and we're going to have on the bright side, we're going to have a chance to be experts at this. I'm going to leave time at the end for Q&A, and I want to encourage you to ask your questions in the chat or that Q&A box as we go along. I'll pause for, to answer questions, and then I have some takeaways at the end. Kids, cats, dogs, doorbells, those are the kinds of things that are now become normal in our work days. That's okay. I'm trying to make this participatory, so please do use the chat. My slides and resources can all be found at that URL below, which will probably be also sent out to you at the end of this. And just for a metric for success, I hope that you can leave this webinar identifying one thing that you can do to improve virtual meetings or improve remote virtual work. So all of the meetings that I have been doing, I've been trying to start with, just a moment of quiet for us to help collect our thoughts. I'm out in California, so in some ways I can get away with this. But this is a great meeting ritual. Some of my teams do it. Some of my other teams do different things. I'm going to share some of those soon. But I just thought we'd just take a moment to breathe. And I'm using an app called the Insight Timer. And a bell's going to go off, and we'll just take a moment of quiet meditation to be centered. Great. So that was just a moment of silence. In these really weird, difficult times, it's really good to start and incorporate rituals into your virtual work. Rituals help us. There's some consistency to it, and it eases that uncertainty. So I wanted to begin. I wanted to do a couple of polls to learn a little bit about your experience with remote work and virtual meetings. So I'm going to start this first poll, and I'm going to launch it. And just I want to get a sense of how many of you did have work at home policies in place. Was it were you working at home virtually all the time? Did you have a work from home policy, either formal or informal, but people could work remotely when they wanted to, or does mostly everybody worked in your office all the time? So just wanted to get a sense of that. In some cases, nonprofits are all virtual, so for them the shift was not as painful. For those with some work at home policy, it was sort of a hybrid where some people were remote and some people were. And you got to, it was your choice to work at home or not. And then for most of us, which I'm seeing here, and I'm going to share it right now. Let's see if I can share that. Right now, more than half of the group, let me share the results. More than half the group had, was used to working in physical space. And it is a shift to all of a sudden be remote. Stop sharing that. I'm going to go to the next poll. Hold on. And the next poll is about, I want to know how many of you on the call are managing a remote team. So versus being a part of a remote team, because there is a little, a lot depends on, with creating a robust culture, a lot of it has to do with who is managing it. And so there's going to be some tips here for those of you who are managing, and some tips for some of you who are participants in teams. And it looks like we have 3/4 are managing teams, and we have 1/4 that are members of teams. I'm going to share that result. And we'll go to the next poll. Let's see. Let me shift it to the next poll. Do you agree with the following statement? Our staff is very productive working as a remote distributed team. Do you agree strongly? Agree? Are you neutral? Disagree? Disagree strongly? And I'm going to launch this poll. Just want to get a sense of what your feeling of productivity is now that you've made this shift. And see if it corresponds with some of the studies that have been coming out about remote work in the last a few weeks or so. And let's see, most people have taken it. And I'm going to end the poll, and I'm going to share the results somewhat. So a lot of you are adjusting or feeling productive, getting work done. A few of you are sort of on the neutral, and then some are having some issues with productivity. And productivity has gone up, but one of the things we are sort of missing is that human connection, and that's a lot of what I'm going to be talking about in a moment. So if you were on my last call, I did an icebreaker that was kind of a check-in with how people were feeling with the uncertainty around COVID-19. And it's really important to start meetings and sessions together with just that check-in, being human. And this one is more lighthearted, and it's kind of a reminder that we need to have joy and laughter in our lives. So if you want to type into the chat, what's one thing that made you laugh in the last week? In the resources that I'm sharing, I have, kind of many different lists of different questions that you can ask as check-ins. You can do them in chat. If you have a small group, you can have each person unmute themselves and share a 30-second or 60-second answer to the questions. So let's see, what's one thing that made you laugh? Well, I'll tell you one thing that made me laugh this week. I'm seeing a lot of, children Zoom bombing is one of them. Yes, that's great. One thing that made me laugh was a New Yorker cartoon, I think, and it was a picture of a guy who was working from home, and there was a spotlight around his desk, which was completely neat, but beyond that it was a complete mess. So I'm seeing people connecting, with their family or their dogs, their pets, playing silly games with kids, even if this connection is remote, and escaping, watching TV, so that so we got to remind ourselves that laughter and fun can reduce stress. And while we're doing this really important work and delivering and making our deliverables, it's really important that we also try to have fun and laugh together as much as possible. And I don't know if some of you saw this, the Getty Museum launched something called the Getty Pandemic Challenge, and you had to recreate famous works of art with materials you had at home. And it kind of went viral. You can see here the irises from Van Gogh created with vegetables that were in the kitchen. And so it reminds us that finding joy and having fun is important. So we've got to think a lot, how can we bring this to our workplace culture while getting that important work that we need to get done? And how can we do this kind of virtually? So here's another example, and I'll share the link to this. This is Spreadsheet Pixel Art, and it's basically a Google sheet that where you've put a snippet of code where you replace numbers with colors, and everybody gets a copy of it, and they can recreate the drawing that's there. And you can do this short term, or you can do it long term competition to see who on your remote team produces the best work of art. So. So let's talk a little bit about a robust virtual culture and how you can shift away from some of the negative impacts of COVID-19. And what we're seeing, and you're probably seeing this in your own workplace, or you're hearing about it from colleagues, it's the uncertainty. I know it makes it difficult to plan. We don't have a clear end to the pandemic. We don't know that by June 11th, this will be over with. And there's financial uncertainty, and a lot for nonprofits as well as the people they serve, not to mention furloughs and layoffs. And this is compounded by postponed events and interrupted programs. And yet we also have a higher demand for our services. So this makes planning difficult. So there's a cloud of uncertainty that we're having to do our work under. Then there's the isolation factor. Social distancing and quarantine have prevented most of us from engaging with our normal day-to-day lives and interacting with family and friends, and we have to do it over Zoom. And working at home, even if you're used to it, can feel lonely, and I guess it's particularly difficult for those who are working alone without families. The other is work-life balance. This is what we talked about previously on the other webinar, how difficult it is to manage the boundaries between work and your personal life when you're inside all the time, and it can lead to overworking and burnout. And then of course we have this technology overload, the onslaught of using video platforms and other virtual tools for everything in our lives, not just work, but to family holiday celebrations and everything else. And this has caused a new type of technology overload called Zoom, or virtual exhaustion, and it comes from staring at people's faces. So, what I think we need to think about are new norms, establishing calming workplace norms. And this is, I don't know if you remember or saw on Twitter, just back in March, there was a tweet, someone said, "You're not just working from home, you're at your home during a crisis trying to work." And that was a tweet that went kind of viral. And so what you're seeing up here are some workplace norms that were issued from the Canadian government, and they acknowledge that none of us is working at 100% or being our best self. And each of us is dealing with a different set of challenges, and our ability to cope with this very wisely. So now is not the time to insist upon business as usual. And I think what's also happening, many of us who are lucky enough to still have jobs are feeling anxious about keeping them. And we might even feel we have to prove ourselves, and we tend to do that by overworking, and we know that can lead to burnout. And of course, it can be reassuring to sort of carry on and pretend, that if we hustle enough, everything will work out fine. And this is the attitude that has come to define the modern American workplace. And it was here before the pandemic. We have to produce more, we have to achieve more, we have to innovate, we have to work harder, longer hours, or else we'll get left behind. So despite our tremendous ability to adapt and grow, we're not immune to the conditions of the world that's outside our doors. And we need to acknowledge that, calming norms, work norms, and expectations, I think, are really in order. And if you look here, you can see what these principles are. Your personal, physical, and mental, emotional health is far more important than anything else right now. You should not try to compensate for lost productivity by working longer hours. You'll be kind to yourself and not judge how you're coping based on seeing others coping. You'll be kind to others and not judge how they're coping based on how you are coping. And your team's success will not be measured in the same way when things were quote unquote normal. So again, just a reminder that we're all humans, and that it's really important for us to have this more resilient, caring workplace that has a culture of well-being. And so this is something that I've worked on a lot in my book, The Happy, Healthy Nonprofits. And despite these enormous, nonprofits are also learning how to build these workplace cultures that are really robust, that not only address burnout and mental health issues, but help us be really productive and get things done. And so this is the 5 F's framework. It's a framework for a resilient workplace culture. It comes from Laura Putnam. And each of these F words, which are F words we can say, describe something that is in a resilient and robust culture, whether you're working in the office face-to-face or whether you're online. So let's start with functioning, food, and fitness, which is about, do people have what they need to get work done? So one thing is, we've recognized that virtual fatigue can quickly set in, and it can set in when we're sitting at meetings together, because sitting can just make us tired. So it's really important to, as you're on a lot of meetings, to incorporate stretching and make it, normalize it, that it's okay to move around. And I've had some teams where we establish after 45 minutes of sitting where it's okay to stretch, and we play stretch games. With Zoom, it's kind of fun. You can look at everybody and you can follow each other's stretches. Walking meetings. I've been a big fan of walking meetings, and I have been walking every day through this pandemic. I haven't been getting my 15,000 steps, but more like 10,000, but I've also been doing remote walking meetings. I've been doing one-on-ones or with small groups, and it's super easy to do. You just need FaceTime, or you can do it on Zoom. It's a triple bonus, because you get fresh air, you get some exercise, you get camaraderie, and you also can get new ideas, as research has shown us that when we do walking meetings, it gets the brain cells flowing and it can generate new ideas. So that's the first F, functioning. Do we have what we need to function? Fitness, food. The next level is feelings. How are we? A resilient work culture is one where everyone enjoys working with each other. There's a strong feeling of community, and this helps combat isolation. This is an example from a small nonprofit that threw a remote birthday party for one of their colleagues, who has you'll see there, they're wearing a Zoom, they have a funny Zoom background, and it's the dog eating a cupcake because that person has an unruly dog. And this was done as a surprise party. She came into the staff meeting, and everybody, had these backgrounds and said, "Surprise, happy birthday." And they had a local zoo, and they even had the llama come on, and they had some gifts delivered to her house at the time of the meeting. And it was just a great time to kind of celebrate together and maintain and strengthen those connections and friendships. Before the pandemic, many nonprofits encouraged and supported informal meals and coffees in small groups or pairs. So, and you can continue to do that virtually in a number of ways. So if you're using Slack, you can use a randomizer app that selects a group of people to, eat lunch together or to have coffee together. Of course, it would be do virtually, not face-to-face. And if you have a modest budget, each person maybe could order takeout or a pizza and eat it together. One organization does this with virtual coffees, and the app is called the Donut Bot, and it randomly matches pairs for virtual coffee. And actually the organization has sent coffee gift cards, and also actual coffee beans to people, because they're a big coffee culture. What you're seeing here is an example of a Zoom happy hour, and it's TechSoup's happy hour, and they do this every other Friday. And what happens is that the virtual happy hour has a theme. Here, everyone had to wear a hat, and they had to tell a funny story, and everybody's on camera. And I actually they recently celebrated their, 35th or 40th anniversary. And at one point, I had worked at TechSoup early on, and they did a happy hour where they invited TechSoup alumni. And it was just, there were 50 people on the call, and it was facilitated. Susan Temby, who's wearing a hat up there, would call on people and ask them to share a story. And to me, I felt like a gathering around the campfire. Not as good as a face-to-face, but it was still an opportunity to make that connection. So friendship, enjoy working together, try to simulate, building relationships and engaging with each other as you would normally in the workplace. The next is feelings. Do people feel appreciated? How do they feel that human connection? And one way to do this is to simulate the water cooler. In many offices, we had opportunities for serendipitous connections, for informal communication, for both non-work and work-related ideas. And this might happen while walking the halls or in the break room or by the water cooler. In fact, it's called the water cooler effect. It's documented. There's research around this. And this is where new ideas may be hatched, or cross-department pollination. And there's ways that you can incorporate the water cooler conversation into your virtual work. So if you're using something like Slack, you can actually set up a channel called the water cooler. And I know one organization that actually put a picture of their office's water cooler and their break room pinned to the top of the chat. Alternately, if you're using Zoom, you can set up a personal room that's open 24/7 for people to drop into. Some teams also are establishing drop-in or open office times, the real world equivalent of popping your head into a colleague's office to ask a quick question. And so these interactions can be distracting or annoying if you don't establish some norms around it. So one way to handle it is to set up open door times. And on all of the collaboration software, there is a status update for your profile where you can say you're open, or you could establish certain times. Another team makes it a norm to be able to jump in on video to ask quick questions. So if your team is used to doing that in person, popping your head over the, across the way, or popping your head in the door to ask a question, you could have this agreement where you can pop on video for 5 minutes to ask that question, rather than trying to book calendar time for 5 minutes. In fact, if you're using Slack, you can use the command Zoom, and you get an instant Zoom link for anyone in that channel, and then you can hop on a call. Other ways that this has been done is in addition to maybe a water cooler channel, they've had a life work from home channel where people can talk about and share resources about working remotely, or articles about fun things to do with family or indoors. So simulating that water cooler. And here's another idea. It might sound kind of hokey, but a lot of people found this satisfying, is to book team time for a certain block of an hour or maybe 90 minutes where you're all heads down working quietly together. It sounds hokey, but some people found this increasing the sense of connection. There's also giving people shout outs and appreciation. And there is a plugin for Slack called Hey Taco. And basically, you can give each other tacos, which is giving each other shout outs. Some organizations have just created their own custom emojis for this. I'm on the board at N10, and the staff has one, and it's it's not necessarily a shout out. It's a way to acknowledge if people are feeling stressed. It's called the pizza blanket emoji. And the pizza blanket is that if you're just feeling overwhelmed and because of the pandemic or whatever, and you just feel like you just need to eat your feelings, or you just want to roll up with a blanket, people are able to share that, with the pizza blanket emoji, that they're feeling this way, and others can provide support. Another is, sending handwritten cards. There's nothing like a handwritten note, and, sending it in the old-fashioned postal office. Some executive directors have been sending handwritten notes to staff to remind them how much their work means to the organization. Another organization I know has included blank cards, so that the staff members can write notes to their loved ones. So handwritten notes. A number of colleagues have been doing handwritten chain letters to folks, other professionals in the nonprofit field. So that's been a lot of fun. Ways to keep that human connection, which we're all craving and all missing so much. Team building games. I mentioned a few at the beginning that had to do with art. So the easiest way to integrate team game building activities is to create rituals of meeting check-ins or maybe checkouts. So it's usually maybe 10 minutes or so. It's low risk. It's not related to the work at hand. It's an opportunity for people to get to know each other. They're not necessarily therapy sessions, but it's a way for people to express how they're feeling. Or you can have dedicated team games. I've heard lots and lots of examples from nonprofits where they're doing different team games to build trust and relationships and social cohesion. And I've included lots of resources in the that link to different team building exercises you can try. The one you see on the screen is remote work bingo, so you can play it for the week. So that's the third F, feelings. The fourth F is forward, and this is about personal growth or personal development. And, you know, we're all stuck at home, and I think this is a great time to take a virtual class or to learn new skills. A lot of colleges and platforms like Coursera are offering free classes, and it's a great way to enrich yourself during this time. If you are fans of TED Talks, are putting up several TED Talks a day that you can listen to how thinkers are thinking about the pandemic. There's nothing more inspiring than a TED Talk. And the nice thing about it is 15, 20 minutes, and you're kind of inspired and you've opened yourself up to some growth and new ideas. And finally, the fifth F is fulfillment, and this is being connected to the mission. And what you're seeing there is, and this is the face-to-face example, is the organization CARA, which is a workforce development agency that's in Chicago. Once a month, they do a drumming circle where they bring someone in who's been through the program and they share their story about how much the organization's program has meant to them. And it's really uplifting. And this could be done virtually on Zoom. Another nonprofit that I know, they do an organization-wide Ask Me Anything with the executive director or a department. And what they do is they crowdsource the questions. They use a tool called Slido. And then they use that to do it, to do the Ask Me Anything. So those are the 5 Fs that kind of make up a resilient workplace culture. And in the resources, I've included kind of a recipe that you can do with your team. And it's basically facilitating a conversation and find out and generate some ideas that relate to these different Fs, and then try piloting a few things. So I'm going to take a breath here, and I'm going to ask you to think about what I've just presented and maybe share this in the chat. What is an activity that your team can do to build a resilient virtual culture that relates to one of the 5 Fs? So think about it, maybe jot it down. If there's any questions that have come up while I've been talking, I'm going to take a quick peek. And I'm seeing people tell me that they're doing coffee and conversations as well as Zoom lunchrooms. I love that idea. Possibly having lunch together. Everyone enjoys food. I know one organization that they have a small takeout budget, and they've allowed people to, you know, order takeout and then get together on Zoom and have, you know, and have a meal together. Great. So I hope you're thinking about one thing that you can do that relates to the 5 Fs. So now I'm going to give you some tips around virtual meetings. And meetings are a big part of workplace culture and getting things done. And I think there's an art to virtual meetings that makes them energizing versus exhausting. So let me give you, and I think it all has to do with the design and the facilitation. So I'm going to run through a couple of tips. So the first thing, I think this is something I would have said, even if we weren't all working remotely, it's just been exaggerated. Do you really need a meeting? What's happening is that we're having too many back-to-back meetings without a break. And I suggest that, you know, no more than 90-minute Zoom calls without a break, okay? And try to program breaks into your schedule. And one way to do this is to think about what kind of work can be done asynchronously on your own time. And this makes use of things like Google Docs and Slack. Are there ways to, you know, have some of the discussion and debate before you come into the meeting, and then you're using your FaceTime to actually make decisions, and your FaceTime can be shorter. And another way to do this, more organizations, instead of having really long staff meetings once a week or every other week, they've had more frequent check-ins, but shorter meetings, and they're using it, designing it as a marketplace. So they're shorter, more frequent meetings. Everybody sees each other on video if you're using Zoom, and they're tightly facilitated. It's not really to report. It's basically to, I need help with, to share what your deadlines are, and to share what your progress and roadblocks are, and to share what your capacity is. They have been called, I like the name marketplace meetings. They've also been called standing meetings, which is a little ableist language, but some organizations now are shifting to these more frequent but shorter meetings that really allows people to check in on deliverables. The other is to make sure that you assign meeting roles and design that agenda. And designing agenda is outlining what topics you're going to discuss, how long you're going to discuss them, and who's going to lead the discussion. And then it's always great to have different roles to help keep you on track. Of course, a facilitator, somebody who's dealing with the tech. I like to call that a tech steward. Maybe a note taker, a timekeeper if you need it. And these other roles are kind of fun, but they also help us be more productive and less exhausting. The other is the rabbit hole monitor. And if you find that you're going down rabbit holes and endlessly debating something, you have a symbol that says, we're on the rabbit hole, let's get off. If you're using video, you can actually make rabbit ears on your head. Another one is ELMO, which stands for enough, let's move on. And one way to do this is to have everybody print out a picture of ELMO. And anybody can call an ELMO any time during a meeting, and that's when the meeting just has gotten a little bit off track, and you still have other things to cover, and you can call an ELMO. The other role there is Yoda, which comes from Star Wars. You know, we know Yoda, but the Yoda is the person who's saying the thing that's not being said, who's mentioning the elephant that's in the room. So assign meeting roles and design your agenda. Embracing new norms for the workplace. You know, you might remember this BBC interview with this expert from Korea who had his meeting crashed by his 4-year-old and then his 2-year-old, and that was, he pushed them away because, you know, children shouldn't be at meetings. But now a lot of us are juggling, you know, parenting and work, and so children and maybe pets are going to make an appearance. So welcome them, allow them to say hello. You could even do a team building activity to have everybody's bring their dog or their cat or their other pet and do a show and tell. I know one nonprofit that's done that. If you're using Zoom, you might want to encourage a practice of being on camera, and it is difficult because we all can't get our hair done, and people are self-conscious about seeing their face, or maybe they have some social anxiety because their background, their house is messy. So, you know, establish the rules around that and be flexible. And if you are going to be on camera, there's some tips to make yourself look good. You want to have good lighting. You don't want to look like you're in the witness protection program. And one simple way to do that, I do it myself. If you notice in the beginning, there was great goddess light. I just happen to have a lamp right behind my computer and a piece of white paper right underneath my keyboard that reflects. If you're using Zoom, there's a little pro tip. If you go into the profile area, there's a little box that you can check that says touch up my appearance. It gets rid of wrinkles and pimples. It's a good tip. If your house is messy, or if you have people walking in the background, you can use one of the backgrounds on Zoom. And you don't have to have a fancy computer. You can click the little box that says green screen, as long as your background is kind of a white wall, and you can use one of the backgrounds that are provided, or if you're handy with a program called Canva, you can make your own. There's lots and lots of resources out there to get fun artwork and backgrounds. But a pro tip is to remember how to change your settings. This is a story was circulating how one work group, the boss came, they had a happy hour, and she came dressed as, put a filter on that made her face into a potato, but forgot how to turn it off for the regular staff meeting. The next thing is to use Engergizers. If I had you on Zoom meeting where we're all on camera, I would actually demo this, but this one is fun. It's a 3-minute, 2-minute game. You have everybody, you raise your hand, and you put it horizontal, and that's the dance floor. And then you take your other hand and you make a 2-person, and that person dances. You put some dance music on, and the person who dances the longest gets a prize. Takes 2 or 3 minutes. People laugh. A lot of fun. Meetings should also have retrospectives. And the retrospective, of course, includes, what are the to-dos and takeaways, based on what we discussed, what decisions did we make, you kind of recap those. But you can always do things to help make your meetings better, and that's called a plus delta. Spend a few minutes asking what worked well for you during this meeting, what needs to be improved for next time. Another way to approach is what made you glad, sad, or mad during this meeting. It's always great to sort of continuously evaluate your virtual meetings and try to make them better. The next is to establish a ritual to end the meeting. It's really awkward at the end of Zoom meetings. There's kind of a delay before everybody switches off. They don't know whether to smile at the camera or, it's very awkward. So we have been creating rituals of just waving goodbye. We wave until everybody leaves. And actually that's been a nice way to kind of transition out of the meeting, and it doesn't feel awkward or abrupt. So those are some tips for facilitating virtual meetings to make them more engaging and less exhausting. I'm just going to pause for a moment and see if there are any reflections, any ideas, any questions that have popped up. I'm going to take a peek over into the question area and into the chat. Any questions that are coming up? Okay, so this last bit are some tips for managers, and also maybe some of you who aren't managing a team, maybe to bring to your manager who's managing the remote team, but just a couple of basic tips around managing remote teams to make it less stressful and to avoid this kind of a potential of overworking leading to burnout. First of all is establishing your rules of engagement. So these are around establishing expectations around when and where and how long you are engaging. One way to lower anxiety about missing something important or being seen as a slacker is, if we're not able to respond within, that 24/7, is to establish these rules of engagement that spell out your team's work hours, which tools you'll use, and who to contact, and when you're going to take a vacation day or a staycation day, or when you're going to take a mental health day, even if you're going to be at home. Maybe I know last week was it last week or maybe it was the week before, I reached a wall and I announced to all of my teams, I'm taking a mental health day on Friday. I'm taking my sick day. I just need to not be working. I just need to do lettering and do arts and crafts or something. I've hit a wall, and I just put that on my status update. I'm not going to be available. Or people, and I'm noticing now people, as we're hitting summer, people are taking stay vacations, and they are, not being on all the time. It's also good to establish regular office hours. If we're home all the time, we could be working all the time. We covered this in the work-life balance piece, but it's also good to explicitly state them. I'm on one team where there is one person who is homeschooling with 5 kids. And what they've had to do now is, she said, I only can work Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays. And that's when I'm available for meetings. I'm looking at the question here. What do you suggest to help others understand your rules of engagement when they may not be part of your team? One activity you could do is to have a organization-wide session, and you could actually design this where you have a template. Maybe these 5 questions, and maybe fill it in as a Google sheet and have each person fill it in, and then talk about it, and then establish what those rules are. I think one of the things that's important too, especially with using like things like Slack, is that we could get into this cycle of just emailing people and slacking people on weekends and all the time, and that sets up that expectation that we should always be working. So that, I think that's a really good kind of rule of engagement to establish, and really to start relying on, you might be working all the time, but maybe, or you might find that if, let's say you're parenting during the day and you might have quiet time to write something, and that's after hours, but maybe you need to use the scheduling tools that are in your email. And also Slack has a scheduling tool that if you have to write or respond to something, you can schedule it to go out during regular business hours. The other thing is to value deliverables and not seat or screen time. I think we can't put this expectation that all staff is going to be at their desk 24/7 and just respond all the time. You know, flexibility, that's going to lead to burnout, but there is this flexibility to remote work that can make us a little bit more productive. And if you're not clear what your reports are producing, you know, agree on a standard for updates. And that might be a weekly bulleted list or a daily note or links to work artifacts. And maybe you need to add more interim deadlines and decision points. You know, we're all really good at procrastination, like really good. But, you know, there's a solution. You know, deadlines help drive action. And so this can help us you know, get focused and avoid getting distracted on non-essential tasks. So an easy hack is to ensure meetings focus on making a decision, and that meetings become the deadline for teams to prepare for input. It's also helpful to do more, as I mentioned before, more asynchronous work. And finally, I think setting up questions around remote check-ins that are not just about deliverables is also really important. Yes, we have to get work done. Yes, we should, if you're checking in with someone, yes, and they're responsible for generating a report, yes, you want to talk about that. But you also, in this difficult time, we want to ask some open-ended questions that open the door for people to talk about, you know, how they're coping. You know, things like, how would you describe your level of energy these days? What fears or concerns do you have around the team or organization? Do you feel well equipped to do your job well? What can I do as a manager to help create an environment for you to do your best work? So, so those are a set of tips around managing remote teams. I gave you some tips around managing and facilitating and designing remote meetings, and then also about a resilient workplace culture. So I just want to pause here and open it up to any kind of questions that you might be having or ideas that you want to share. So I'm going to sort of like take a moment here to take a breath and kind of scroll through the chat. So we'll go back to the beginning part, which was the sort of fun part. How is your team letting off steam and having fun? Elizabeth has shared with us that she has a trivia night that she hosts for coworkers. That'd be great, Elizabeth, if you're still on, share a little bit more about how you facilitate that. That sounds like a great lot of fun. Someone's mentioning a game here that staff were working on the ordering from an Amazon website from home, and one was putting things in a cart and the other was taking them out, thinking the website was acting up and putting things into their cart. So that was kind of, that's more like a fun thing that made everyone laugh. Scrolling down. I see Jessie has shared staff-led fun activities at each staff meeting. I would love to hear a little bit more about that. Like, what are some of the specific activities that you're doing? If you'd like to share that in the chat. Oh, here's a great idea. We plan to mix and match group meetings so people can see others in the agency and to create a water cooler channel. That's great. Another really fun team building exercise you can do, and everybody has to feel comfortable with this, is that you can do a show and tell. So you can bring an object, or else with Zoom, you can actually take them to an area of your house, and if it's a painting on the wall or something, and share the story behind that. Great, I see some questions coming in. What are some of the best free or low-cost tools for teams to connect, or for multiple people to work on the same project remotely? So one of the things that I recommend is that we try to is for the team to use the same set of tools. And over again, I think 3 tools come up as kind of like the basics for remote work, and that's Zoom for our meetings, Slack for the discussions in between, and Google Docs for our writing together, generating reports, generating presentations together, or co-creating a budget. So those are like 3 of the foundations. There are other tools that you can use that can help make decision-making fun. And I've kind of a list of those, like there's virtual sticky note tools, quiz tools. I see someone has mentioned Kahoot. And this is to like kind of create a fun activity. I create questions on the program, and then they all join via Zoom, and it's about an hour every Wednesday night. So there's things that quiz programs you can use, virtual sticky notes, ways to crowdsource and vote on ideas. And I have put together a list of those different tools that can help you collaborate on projects. There's also a lot of really great plugins for Slack, if you're using Slack, that help facilitate collaborative work on Zoom. And that's anything from, figuring out when you can meet, to notes and comments on documents, adding suggestions, debriefing, discussing. So Slack is a really great basic tool, but there's also a lot of really good plugins that facilitate virtual work. So, okay, so wonderful. Okay, so do you have any tips on managing employees remotely who are not working up to expectation? Okay, so I think that would require a one-to-one check-in call. So, I assume that you're already doing some sort of check-in, and again, you might want to set up a kind of regular template, whether it's just bullet points, and these are the things I'm working on this week, and here are the links to them. Maybe you want to discuss them. Maybe, talking about maybe helping them parse out a work plan to actually do the work. Maybe they're suffering from, I used to say, the salami problem. Eating a big salami is a lot, and it's best to cut it into small pieces so you don't get overwhelmed. So maybe it's sort of coaching them around that, having some check-in points for some of the smaller mini deadlines around bigger projects can also help. So more frequent check-ins, more one-to-one, asking some of these questions around, what do you need to be able to do to complete your work? How can I be of assistance? Which I just went through this actually with one of the groups that I'm working with, where there was somebody on the team who was just not, performing up to, on par. And part of it had to do with their personal situation, where they had a relative who was sick, very ill with COVID. And they hadn't shared that with the manager. So they made some accommodations for that. Another person was having problems with their technology. Where they were in a location where the internet wasn't high speed. And so they were having to find some workarounds with some different tools and techniques to work around low bandwidth. Another one had a problem where they were just overwhelmed and difficulty concentrating. So it's really, I think it boils down to the check-in. Seeing some great ideas here for fun, to show pictures of their childhood, since we couldn't take your child to work day, and they played categories about where they're, share their favorite books. So I'm seeing some more ideas come in for fun activities. Here's another question about how can you tactfully have the conversation with leadership of your organization about judging performance not by screen hours or but by deliverables. So I think you should, you know, and I have pointed to some of this, and this is, you know, something that was also in the era before pandemic, that, you know, there's workplace productivity studies that show that if you work more than 60 hours a week, you know, let's say you're working 80 hours a week, that 20 hours really isn't getting you any more productivity. So, and it could better be spent in kind of renewing yourself and improving your resilience. So maybe pointing to some of the research. So in the wrap up, I'm gonna just have a few minutes left and I wanna honor your time, is I want you to think about one thing that you can do to make online meetings more engaging or remote work culture more resilient. What's one thing that you can take back, one step that you can do to do that? And I want you to think about baby steps. All of this is about baby steps. What's one small change that you can make to make your meetings more engaging, or to make more resilient remote work culture, or to better manage your remote team? And while you're thinking about that one thing, I'm just going to remind you that the resources can be found here. I think somebody has asked, will we be able to access the slides from this presentation? Yes, you will. I'm going to, there's a copy up there, and there's also a link to many of the different resources that I referenced during the presentation. So with that, I am going to stop sharing, and I'm going to turn it back to Jeff or to Maggie. I'm not sure which one.
Jeff, do you have anything else you would like to add before we close out today's session?
No, I just want to say thank you to Beth, and thank you for everyone for attending. As I mentioned before, we did record the webinar, and Maggie will be posting it on the Scranton Area Foundation YouTube channel, and I will be posting a link to it on the Moses Taylor Foundation website, along with the link that Beth provided you to all of her resources. And as you answer Beth's last question there, you know, I see some of the answers coming up now, and I'm interested in hearing about what else you incorporate into your organizations over the coming weeks. So if you're doing anything exciting or creative, please feel free to keep us updated so we can share that with others.
Great, thanks so much, Jeff, and thank you all for being here today. A special thank you to Beth for providing such an insightful presentation today, and really getting us all thinking about how we can, you know, be more effective in this virtual environment, and really take into the needs of our employees or coworkers, or even friends that, you know, we are interacting with. So thank you so much for being on this. And as Jeff mentioned, I will get the information out about today's recording. And lastly, there will be a survey at the end of this that we will ask for everyone to please fill out as they can.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.